Hello, welcome to the Ditton YouTube channel where I discuss various elements of speakers. Today I'm going to get back to one of my favourite brands, Celestion. Now I picked up a pair of quite unusual Celestion speakers today, and before I go into them I'm just going to run through a little bit of Celestion history. So Celestion has been around for donkey's years, about 1924 that was founded, but their first hi-fi speaker, officially hi-fi speaker that you could buy already in a cabinet, not one that you had to assemble your own cabinet and bought as a kit, was the Ditton 10 15 ohm, and that was in 1964. A few years after that, the Ditton 15 arrived, and then the Ditton 25 arrived, and then you start to fill out the Ditton range with the inclusion of the Ditton 66 and the Ditton 44. And they went through a few sort of alterations over the years, namely that they went from black fronts to veneer fronts, which are commonly known as the Series 2. And basically the range grew larger. So you then had the introduction of the Ditton 11 and the Ditton 22. Well, earmark that because that's important in a minute. And the Ditton 33, and then they went through another revision in the late 70s, early 80s with the triple digit series, so Ditton 332, Ditton 551, 662, and so on and so on. Now, much later on, as we move more into the CD era, there was some kind of throwbacks to the earlier speakers, the earlier designs. So a good example is the Ditton 15. So the very early Ditton 15, you could find a 1966 pair of Ditton 15s, went through an evolution and became the Ditton 15 XR, which stood for extra range. And the HF unit was changed from the very famous HF 1300 to an HF 1000, or an HD 1000, some people call it. And the drive units changed from a cast 8-inch unit to a pressed steel 8-inch unit. Now, as we moved further on, there was a speaker called the Ditton 150, which looks like a much newer Ditton 15 XR. And that's where I think these start to play a part. These are quite unusual. I've never had a pair, I've never seen a pair before. What I picked up today is the Ditton Truvox. I had to check. Ditton Truvox 230. Let's have a closer look at them. In the late 1940s, Celestion, post-war obviously, was bought out by a company called Truvox, and the name became sort of immersed with the Celestion brand. Celestion has been various names over the years, so you'd have Roller Celestion, Celestion International, so on and so on. But Truvox was a separate company that bought them. And you can still find products today that are called Celestion Truvox, predominantly in the PA side of things. But what we've got here is these Truvox 230 Celestion International. So we can pretty much date these because of the Celestion International brand name. And the Truvox 230 to me looks remarkably similar to a Ditton 22, which is why I asked you to earmark Ditton 22 earlier on. And they are uncanny. They look very similar. So you have an 8-inch bass driver, about a 5-inch mid-range driver, and a 1-inch soft dome HF unit. Now these are slightly different to the Ditton 22. The Ditton 22 has the HF, or HD as some people call it, 1000. This is the HF 1001, which you'd find in things like the Rogers LS6. This mid-range unit looks remarkably similar to the Ditton 22 unit. It looks like a different chassis. It's a pressed steel chassis. But the size, surround, the fact that it's got a doped dust dome is all reminiscent of the Ditton 22. Now this cone on the bass driver is ever so slightly different to the Ditton 22's paper cone. They're both paper cone and they're both doped, but this has got a textured surface which is very similar to the Ditton 88 or DL10 mid-range unit. So again, you know roughly what era this is. I'm going to look it up in a minute and find out exactly when these were. But as you can see, they look remarkably like Ditton 22s. Let's have a chat about how they sound. So how do I think they sound? Well, first of all, they're a three-way speaker. My personal favourite has always been a two-way design, so you only have to cross over from the mid-bass unit to the HF unit. On this design, obviously, you're going from the bass driver, crossing over to the mid, and then crossing over to the HF unit, giving you a dedicated mid-range unit, which is where our hearing is most sensitive. I was quite surprised when I first turned them on. I've gone from a pair of Spendor speakers, which are not wow speakers, they're a speaker that invite you into the listening session, to a pair of speakers that are really quite fun sounding, to be honest with you. They make any piece of music sound quite lively. That's probably down to the fact that they're quite lively, lossy cabinets, and they're not bad in any way. They are pushing a little bit on the bright side, and they haven't got the deepest bass response ever, but they're really good fun to listen to. So you're getting almost some of that Ditton 22 magic that arcs from an era of, really quite romantic sounding speakers, just brought up to date slightly. Well, I say up to date, brought into the 80s with the introduction of the slightly more powerful HF 1001 over the HF 1000. They are prone to blowing, to be honest with you. I must have fixed, I don't know how many pairs of HF 1000s over the years. But tonal characteristics, they're good fun. They are quite exciting to listen to. They're very detailed, but bordering on the line of being a smidge bright, in my honest opinion. Low end is not the deepest, but it's pretty punchy and it's quite fun to listen to. The mid-range, that's the first and most prominent thing I noticed. Obviously, going from a two-way design to a three-way design, you have got quite a lot going on in the mid-range frequencies. But listening to that track there, you're really getting a sense of the breadth of the instrument being played and the rasp of the reeds, so on and so forth. It's enjoyable to listen to. Okay, what I'm going to do now is quickly switch back to my Spendor SP22s and give those a listen in comparison to these. I'm going to record that as well so you guys can see or hear if you can detect any difference. Okay, tonal characteristic differences between the two. Being a two-way design, first of all, the mid-range frequencies aren't quite so forward. They sound to me slightly more in balance. Bass response, the Spendors are a larger bass unit and they're front ported. Although the Spendors are not renowned for an enormous amount of bass, they are slightly more weighty in the LF than the Celestions are. But in terms of fun to listen to, okay, the Spendors you could spend hours and hours and hours. Musicality, absolute musicality. But I've got to say, fun factor has got to be the Celestions. That you would just find yourself tapping your feet, nodding your head and thoroughly enjoying that particular track on these. Very enjoyable. The only drawback with that is, let me put it to you two ways. If you've got good front end on decent speakers, you've got a pretty well matched system. If you've got lower grade speakers with a good front end, the front end will bring the most out of the speakers. So these Celestions are probably sounding as good as they could be. If I put those on my old Pioneer setup, I probably wouldn't be that impressed with them, to be honest with you. What I'm trying to say is I'm giving them the best front end I've got, which is giving you the most out of these. As where the Spendors, especially the classic 2.3s, which I'll be reviewing soon when the stands turn up, they're a much higher end pair of speakers, so you desperately need a good front end to get the most out of them. They'll still sound good whatever you give them, but they just get better and better and better. As where the Celestions, I think if you don't give them good front end, you're just not going to be particularly well rewarded with it. I think this is occasionally where some people have felt speakers don't perform as well as their reviews say they do, because they're not really giving them the quality of front end that they require. Now, when it comes to sort of more entry level speakers, I think if you give them, basically what I'm saying, good equipment, lower end speakers will sound pretty good. Ultra high end speakers with poor front end probably won't sound very good at all, in my opinion, in my experience. You're welcome to comment if you disagree with that or have found anything that you think, contradicts that. But in my experience, that's what happened. So a good example was my AVI Bigotrons. Sounded good on the Pioneer. They sound brilliant on the setup I've got now. Let's have a closer look at the cabinet and the rest of the design on these Celestions before we wrap this all up. But what we're looking at here is reasonably good condition. There's a watermark there. No obvious chips and scrapes. No inset rear baffle, which puts them I would imagine, I will look this up, but no inset rear baffle puts them probably pre-1986, just on the fact that most Celestion speakers after that era, especially things like the SL6S, had an inset rear baffle. Typical Celestion of the era, the cabinet is wider than it is deep. So anybody who's got a pair of Ditton 44s out there will know what I'm talking about. They're really wide, but there isn't the depth of cabinet. Again, all the drivers are in, let's just lay that down. All the drivers are in exceptionally good condition. There's your HF1001 soft dome 1-inch tweeter, which has got a protective grille over there, and they are stronger than the HF1000. There's the mid-range unit, which has the doped cone, but this chassis looks different to me than the Ditton 22. And this is what I was talking about on this cone. Now, if you can see that there, there's this sort of dimpled effect. And one of the only other times I've seen that has been on the Ditton 88 DL10 mid-range unit. Something else that's unusual about these, and I'm not sure if you can see it from that camera angle, is their pegs. So the pegs are sticking out of the baffle board rather than inset, and the pegs are on the grille cover. That's something else that is very reminiscent of things like Ditton 150s. That at some point Celestion really changed the aesthetics of the speakers. And I don't mind this actually. They look a little bit ugly with the grille off, but they're certainly less problematic than the old school pegs that go into the baffle boards. I should imagine there's many Celestion owners out there, many loudspeaker owners out there that have busted off grille pegs because they're pretty fragile. These days, of course, most speakers have magnetic coupling grille covers, so they look really neat with the grills off or neat with the grills on. But yeah, to summarise, these, for the price I paid for them, which was ridiculous, these were bought at a charity shop for £10 British. They needed nothing doing to them. They absolutely worked straight away. I just gave them a bit of a clean. They were a little bit dusty. And I was pleasantly surprised when I turned these on and switched them on. Everything worked. And I was quite impressed, to be honest with you. I don't know how long I could live with them compared to the likes of Spendor Classic 2.3s. That's not really a fair comparison. I hope on the video the differences between my old Spendors and these has come through. But typical Celestion, I love them. They sound great, they're good fun. So yeah, that's the review today on the Celestion Truvox 230. I have got a big review coming up. I'm just waiting for a new set of stands for a particular pair of speakers, and once they're here I will do probably a 4 or 5 pair British two-way speaker shootout, and I hope you guys look forward to that. I'll catch up with you soon.